This is your first panel. That's good. It's also going to be the best panel you have all evening. This is the last one of the night, right? Yeah, so that's probably why it's going to be great. This is gaming history, so if you are here for how to build a nuclear bomb, you're in the wrong section. There's always one that leaves. So we're going to start out by introducing ourselves, and we're here to talk about gaming history. We don't really have a plan. We are completely organized, of course. So I thought what we would do is talk a little bit, just briefly, about what our favorite first games were, and then we'll sort of take it from there. I brought some toys here with me today that we can use if we run out of things to say, which we probably won't. And how many Canadians are on this panel? Just me?
Just you.
Wow. So I have brought some Canadian content to make sure that if the CRTC is planning on broadcasting this, that we'll be within compliance. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. I do have...
Are you also going to speak in French and English?
No. I speak English and binary. That's it. But anyways, so we'll get to that, and then, as I said, we'll introduce a little bit of gaming history, because, I want to see if these guys really know their Canadian gaming history. I'm curious if they know. So, I'll start out. My name is Sid Bolton. I am from Brantford, Ontario. Nobody claps. Oh, wait, there's 3 people that clap. Brantford is 20 minutes away from here, and home of Wayne Gretzky, and also where Alexander Graham Bell did a lot of that telephone stuff and made the first long-distance phone call from Brantford, Ontario to Paris, Ontario, which has about 7 people in it. So they want to make sure that someone would actually pick up that phone call. That happened a long time ago. I'm also known as Canada's top video game collector. I have just under 15,000 video games now. A lot of console games, around 10,000 are console games, around 5,000 are computer games. And I also run the Personal Computer Museum, pcmuseum.ca, which is Canada's only interactive computer museum. And the last advertisement for myself, Billy, could you hold that book up, please? I just finished a book. Yeah, or be my model. Okay, you can be my model. Thank you. Collecting for Dragon's Lair and Space Ace. For those that remember, 1983, 1984, 2 of the most beloved Laserdisc video games came out in the arcades, and people are still making money off them. So I decided that I would try to as well. No, it's actually published by the Computer Museum. You'd be shocked, I think, to know that there are over 200 different versions of Dragon's Lair that you can buy. There are dozens and dozens of memorabilia items. The book is just full, absolutely full, 170 pages of stuff about Dragon's Lair and Space Ace. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, make sure you check it out at the end of the panel. So that's it for me. And as far as my gaming history goes, Jake, could I grab that Pitfall? This game, Pitfall, everyone recognize this game? Yeah. David Crane. This game is the reason why I have a game collection. Some guy in school had an Atari 2600. I had a VIC-20. Now, if you know anything about computers, a VIC-20 is not exactly the sexiest computer ever built. It had 5K of RAM. That's really bad. And Pitfall for me, I was always jealous of my buddy that had this thing, and I finally got to buy it. Of course, I have it in the shrink wrap. Such a wonderful game, and I did eventually get to meet David Crane, one of the highlights of my gaming life, you might say. So that's my gaming history, and I'm going to pass the mic down.
I'm Joey DeSena, also known as Rue, on RetroWare TV, amongst other places, Clan of the Grey Wolf. I do a few shows, 16-Bit Gems, and The Way Games Work. Shut up, Pat. I'm also not from Canada, I'm sorry. My gaming history, the first game I ever played was Microsoft Flight Simulator. Despite that, I still like video games. The first one that really left an imprint was, and this is kind of lame excuse or stock answer, but really was Super Mario Brothers, but in the arcade. And I would pump quarters into that thing until I learned how to jump over the first pit, and then more until the second pit, and then I quickly died. Regardless, I had a friend, this was back in first grade, and I went to his house once, and he had a game system where you could play Super Mario Brothers at home. And the rest is a lot of wasted money on eBay. So, next.
Hi, my name is Norman Caruso. I do a show on RetroWare TV as well called The Gaming Historian, where I talk about various topics in video games, most notably their history. I do everything from, let's see, right now I'm doing Star Fox, but I've done the Universal versus Nintendo case, and Donkey Kong, and all sorts of random stuff. My very first game I played was Dark Castle for the Apple II. If anyone remembers that gem. Good on the Apple II, bad on the Genesis. And my first favorite game, like favorite game, was probably Super Mario Land 2 on the Game Boy. So, I'll pass this on.
Also, we're twins.
Pretty close.
Hence the sharing of the water. Thought it was just creepy. I didn't know better.
That's not on the show.
Hello, my name is Jay Hatfield, and I really don't know why I'm up here. No, we have a show on RetroWare TV called The Game Chasers, and
Woo!
awesome, thank you.
They've heard of us?
My earliest gaming memory, oddly enough, coincidentally enough, actually, is Empire Strikes Back here, and
We didn't plan that.
I didn't know what he was bringing in because, like he said, we have no game plan. And then, you know, once Nintendo hit, I went completely bonkers, like most of y'all in here, I'm sure, and it was game over. I play a lot of video games. That's my resume.
Well, I guess you know who I am because I'm associated with this guy over here, but let's see. Yeah, totally get
Of course, your Facebook page.
it. Hey, don't bring that up. Let's see, I started in television. My first memory was in television boxing. Into that, you know, Nintendo, just like, you know, most of us actually, you know, when I first played Super Mario Brothers, it blew my mind. And then when I got a Super Nintendo, I say Super Nintendo is probably my favorite console of all time, Super Mario World. And Link to the Past, the best Zelda game ever made.
Woo!
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I blame you.
My favorite game is Mario 3, and RPG suck.
Hello everyone, how you doing? Good? Alright, cool. No response. All right.
At the NES Club!
I'm a game collector. I also help produce a gaming show called The Video Game Years, which deals with video game history for RetroWare TV. And probably my first gaming memory was playing the Coleco Telstar Ranger, which none of you have heard of, besides Sid, probably. And it was one of those standalones, you know, kind of like this here. Pong. You have like 6 different Pong games. You have squash, you have handball, but it's all Pong. And it had a really big, would get you killed by a cop, light gun, like Magnum, like 44 Magnum gun, and you had a couple of light gun games. And that was my earliest memory. My cousin also had an Atari 2600, and so Pitfall was probably another early memory, Sid. And my cousin always get on me claiming that I broke his 2600 joysticks. I'm like, no, they just break on their own. It wasn't me that did that.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, that's where I'm coming from. So let's go into our next topic awkwardly.
Don't play with the joystick so rough next time.
That's not a cartridge slot. All right. Now, do we have a next topic? I have a next topic if no one else does. Since I'm the only Canadian up here, there's a couple Canadian things I want to talk about. First of all, does anybody in the audience recognize this game?
Yeah, it's Evolution. Yep, Sydney's up.
They can read. Okay, panelists, does anybody know anything about this game? What's the significance of this video game? Does anybody know what is, in gaming history, what is significant about this game?
What's it called?
It's called Evolution, and it was published by a company called Sydney, which happens to be my name, and it's also spelled correctly, although I am not getting any royalties from this, unfortunately. Okay, let me ask you another question then. In terms of Canadian executives in the gaming industry, who has recently changed companies and probably the richest Canadian gaming executive out there? Anybody know? Bill Gates. It's not Canadian. Last time I checked. See, he worked at a company called Distinctive Software, which he founded when he was 17, which was then bought by Electronic Arts, and then he moved to Microsoft. There we go. Don Matrick. Now, Don Matrick is worth about $70,000 billion, lives in Vancouver, is now the CEO of Zynga, for those that have played any mobile games. And Evolution was actually his very first game, and it's actually a pretty good game. He developed this when he was a teenager. He also developed a series of games called Test Drive. Anyone remember Test Drive? Test Drive kind of survived into the console era from the computer era. And that was, Evolution is actually sort of considered to be the first successful Canadian video game. And it just happens to be that the guy that designed and programmed it, he did work on it with someone else, but went on to be and continues to be a very successful executive in video games, which is kind of interesting because a lot of times you wonder where people come from. So that's your Canadian gaming history lesson for today. And also, could you hold up the BCs? Anyone ever hear of BC's Quest for Tires, the video game? You may have heard of the comic. Okay, that was also developed in Canada, close to Ottawa, back in the day, and published in the same year, which was 1983.
Did Sierra put out a version of that?
Yes, Sierra published it. Sydney, again, same company that basically did it up here in Canada, did Evolution, so same thing. Now, there's one other Canadian thing that we can't miss talking about right now that's related to gaming history. Anyone remember this game? So
judgmental.
Yeah, it's a minty fresh copy, still in the original shrink wrap. Pulled it right out of the desert. I don't think there's any video game out there that has more lore associated with it than E.T. It's been considered to be the game that sort of caused the video game crash in the 80s. It's, single-handedly, people say. Stories get sort of exaggerated, I think. But the one big story is that Atari did, and you've all heard it, I'm sure, supposedly buried a whole bunch of these cartridges in the New Mexico desert or landfill. And so, for some reason, somehow, and I was expecting Geraldo Rivera to do a special, where he's going to go digging for everything, but a group in Canada, somehow, I don't know how we managed, probably because we're very nice, right? We're nice, right? We just asked. You guys didn't think to ask nicely to go into this landfill and dig these things up?
They got permission to search for those.
They got permission.
That's not how we do things.
So, right. Sometimes it works. Yeah. So for all you guys that have gone in the middle of the night trying to go through this landfill. So it's in progress right now, but there's been like a 6-month period where they have to go in and actually dig up in the landfill and see if they can find those cartridges. So I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to it. Is there anybody have a feeling on that? You guys, are they going to find anything?
Well, I got. What's the point?
Well, it's something that everybody talks about. I think it's one of those things that I think we'd finally want an answer.
There we go. Well, people are fascinated because they look at it as this was like the death of console video games, and it's simply not true. If anything, E.T. is almost just a reflection of what was going on in the industry at the time. The fact that Atari had absolutely no quality control over their games at all, required no licensing from anyone to develop their own games, so crap was just thrown out there from every direction. You had a game called Chase the Chuck Wagon that was, Purina dog food making their own video game. When you get to that point, when you have pet food games coming out, you're in trouble. The industry's in trouble. And so Howard Scott Warshaw, who we actually interviewed for the Video Game Years, he said, "Yeah, I'd like to be known as the guy that killed the $1 billion industry, but no, it's not true." And it's not true. But for some reason, E.T. sort of the lights put on that game as the first huge licensed game that was a huge, massive failure because it was just rushed out and poorly developed. But it's not the worst game ever. Whoever says it's the worst game ever is just saying it just to say that. And so, I don't know. Can we switch topics or talk about something else? I don't know what I want to talk about maybe ask everyone on here, what was your favorite, I guess, time with video game history and why? You know, what do you grasp onto as like, wow, I love that era of gaming because all these cool games came out, or we had genres that developed their systems. You want to start us off? I'll start us off. Okay. I'm really fascinated by the sort of the NES 8-bit era, just because the industry was dead, it was gone, and Nintendo. It's almost not a miracle, but Nintendo wasn't given a shot at all. They didn't want to put the system in game stores. Nintendo hired for America. Nintendo of America was like 12 guys, including Howard Phillips. They go out to Jersey, northern Jersey. They stay in these awful hotel rooms outside of like Newark Airport in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and they just truck it up to northern Jersey and New York City, like FBO Schwartz's and not even game stores, Toys R Us, and set up the system themselves, set them up in malls, and people, hey, come over here, play this new system, and that's how they got the word out of Nintendo. So it really was a long shot that it gained a foothold, and people gave it a shot after they were so just disappointed in other game systems. So that's why that early, like 85 to 86 point, when people weren't really interested in home consoles even yet, Nintendo really didn't even get popular until about somewhere in 87, where people started actually, you knew someone that had the system or was going to get it for Christmas of 87 is usually when people got it. So that's one of the most fascinating times to me, just because it was just like almost, video games became new again around that time to a lot of people.
I guess my favorite moment would be, I guess right around this when the Super Nintendo came out. Because up until that time I was playing NES, and to me that was the quintessential, the video game unit of all time, the best. I mean, how could you ever get any better than that, right? And then like Super Nintendo came along, and I was just fascinated with it. How this is only 16-bit? I mean, that's twice the bits, right? So it's got to be twice as good. Exactly. What is a bit? Rue? Rue will tell you what a bit is, and bit rock maybe. But yeah, I guess that would probably be my favorite moment. Just the anticipation of the Super Nintendo and just getting it for the first time.
Well, since they covered probably two of the greatest eras in video gaming, I'll go ahead and go with the next one, the PS2 days and GameCube. A lot of people give GameCube flack, but there was some good games on it. Resident Evil 4, amazing. First time I played it was on GameCube.
Animal Crossing.
And Monkey Ball. But no, PlayStation 2 is the best-selling home console of all time. So that says something right there for it, doesn't it? The library was enormous. You had your GTA 3. The graphics were so much better than Nintendo had done to that point. Obviously NES, Super Nintendo. So just, I guess, graphically speaking,
They only stopped making the system 2 years ago.
That's true too.
Just about. They're still making PlayStation. That's like 11 years of making a console. I don't think that's ever going to happen again. Or console made Game Boy. No, but that was different iterations of Game Boy. They changed up the iteration. They went to Game Boy Color, they went to Game Boy Advance. Fight.
Wow, that was a real nerd fight.
It's hard for me to pick a particular generation, but I can tell you that when in the early 80s, I actually played most of my computer games on the Commodore 64 and the Apple II, which was, I spent a lot of time doing that. Although today I'm not really a PC gamer, I guess you could say I was a PC gamer back then. In the mid to late 90s, I kind of got into collecting on the Atari 2600 and stuff like that, but I still really wasn't playing. But it wasn't until the Xbox, and it's going to sound strange, but the Xbox came out, and I ended up playing Crash Bandicoot on the Xbox, of all places, even though it was traditionally a PlayStation character. And then I went back to the PS1 games, played all those, and then I was hooked, and then of course the PS2, I had to get that, and then I just honestly fell in love with the PS2, just like you. It's like so many great games. It's such a great library, and so many of the favorite games that I've played from beginning to end for me have been on PlayStation 2.
My favorite moment in video game history is the Game Boy. And I'll tell you why. The Game Boy took video games from something that, just kids and teenagers play, to everybody was playing the Game Boy. Soldiers in the first Gulf War had Game Boys. And if you go to the Nintendo World Store, there is a soldier had a Game Boy and they got a mortar attack and the Game Boy was like fried and it still works. And it's plugged in, and you can play it. Well, you can't play it, but you can look at the Tetris demo at the Nintendo World Store. President George Bush had a Game Boy. I mean, everybody had it. It was like a businessmen had it. It put Nintendo on the next level as well, because can you name another handheld console that can compete with Nintendo's?
They tried.
The Lynx. The Atari Lynx, thank you.
The N-Gage.
And the big Game Gear. Sega Game Gear.
Yeah, Tetris.
Gizmodo.
I mean, yeah. Although PS Vita, we can root for it. Come on, PS Vita.
PSP Go?
So bits have to do with the size of the character in the register and the CPU. And if you have more bits in that character, you can have more information and theoretically make more powerful. Anyway, I could get long. I'm going to kind of copy Billy and say the 16-bit era is my favorite, obviously. Yeah, I know. But I'll talk a little bit differently to why. It's basically the pinnacle of 2D gaming. When the PlayStation, the first one, and the Nintendo 64 and all that came out, 2D gaming was basically considered dead. Now everything cool is now 3D. Look at Super Mario World, and that showed you could do 3D games really well, as opposed to like Bubsy 3D or something like that. Well, Bubsy, the first one's good, but anyway. And so for at least 5, 6, maybe even 10 years, 2D gaming was essentially dead. It was passé. It was old and buried. And interestingly, since then, especially with these rise of indie developers, you see a lot more 2D gaming out, and it's kind of like a retro chic thing. Because 1, they're easy to develop for, 2, they're easy to pick up and play, and 3, you can have very, very deep, engrossing gameplay experiences with a 2-dimensional game that are just more difficult in 3D. Plus you have things like the Uncanny Valley, things like Heavy Rain, while great in production, are still a little creepy to watch.
What did you just say?
You two can fight.
Heavy Rain was overrated. Didn't really do a whole lot. Okay. You guys want your own panel together?
Heavy Rain fan.
But since I have the talkie stick, I'm going to go ahead and change the subject to what I would like. Because
Let's talk about Mario.
Earthbound, no. No, just kidding. Though you should buy it on the Wii U Virtual Console right now. It is kind of rare to have a really literal piece of gaming history in front of us. The first video game is something, I like that. It's kind of debated. Some people consider a game developed by the British during World War II on one of their first computers ever. Noughts and crosses. In America we call it tic-tac-toe. I don't know what you guys call it. One of those. Some people say Tennis for Two in the 50s.
Tic-tac-toe game.
Awesome. Tennis for Two, which was actually made on an oscilloscope at the Brookhaven National Laboratory in New York. That was in the 50s. And then, of course, there's Space War, which was made at MIT in the early 60s. That can all be debated depending on what your definition of a video game really is. The first video game console is not up for debate. It's the Magnavox Odyssey. This came out in 1972 by Ralph Baer, who is still alive, last I checked.
Yes.
Which is amazing. You have the person who by himself developed the first video game console, still alive in his 90s, up in New Hampshire. Okay, I guess it'll be down in New Hampshire here, but... and this was pretty impressive. I'm sure Sid or Pat would definitely like to talk more on it, but I mean, this is a piece of technology that had technically, more than one game on it. It had the first kind of iteration of Pong, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, Pat, you look like you want to jump up and say something.
Yeah, I mean, they're very loosely different games, more or less controlled where
Let me tell you a little bit about this system.
Sorry, Pat.
I mean, yeah. So basically, it can the functions control differently what you can do with the paddles, what you can do with the dots. What's amazing, though, the story I want to say to this is that it's on YouTube, and it's an amazing clip. There was like a game show from like 1972. And it was like a bunch of like celebrities on the panel. It was like guess what this is or guess what I am. And so there was a Magnavox guy in this three-piece suit. He came on to advertise this. The system had not come out yet. And so without seeing it, they had to guess what the guy was doing. He was playing this game on the TV. And you had the host of the show playing with them, and they were describing what was going on. And imagine you had never heard of a video game before in your life. You didn't know even what the concept of one was. And so they were like, what are you doing? You're interacting with the TV. They had no clue. And when they revealed it, the look on these people's faces was just like, they were surprised by it. They knew it was cool, but you could still see they couldn't fully comprehend what was going on. That they were interacting with the TV, with controllers, just like, huh, they're like, it's called a what? It's game interaction. Oh, interesting. And they called it like electronic tennis, and just like, oh, that's really strange. So it's literally a moment in time when video games was like thrust on the world on national television. So go on YouTube, search for it. It's like Odyssey TV game show 1972. That's my story about the Odyssey. So if it wasn't for that little guy, which plugged along and did well, it sold a decent amount. There's like 2 or 3 different iterations of that. Sid probably knows more about than me that did like different like versions of that. They also had like a big like hunting rifle, light gun accessory you can buy for that, which again could get you killed. I guess that's really the motif of back then. They can get you killed, video game guns.
And Ralph Berry, who's an electrical engineer who did this as a hobby. He's an inventor. He has a lot of patents in his name, and he basically, he went to several companies showing this off before Magnavox finally picked it up, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Anything more on the Odyssey?
Actually, Ralph Baer received a medal from the president himself for his works.
That's true.
Video games.
It's like the Medal of Freedom or something like that.
It's also one of those cases where what we think of today as such an amazing thing, we can't probably imagine a world without video games. A lot of struggles. There was a lot of marketing mistakes made. People, because it was made by Magnavox, who was a major manufacturer of televisions at the time, people mistakenly thought that they had to have a Magnavox television to use it. That would be like, you know, having a PS3 today and I can only hook it up to a Sony TV. But there was a lot of confusion because there was a lot of things. But just further to the point with Ralph Baer, I mean, this guy was doing light gun games, and although, like, actually in the late 60s is when he first got that working in the lab. I mean, in the 60s, this guy was like, he was like doing Duck Hunt in his own way.
Well,
I mean, that's just amazing.
Further than that.
Right, I mean, he was doing all this stuff, and it just like, he was just so early and such an amazing guy. But yes, you're right. It does go back quite a ways.
There was amazing electromechanical games. If you want to go before video games, that go back to the 40s, that you can't imagine what they did. They had like projectors.
They had like games back in the 40s, even projectors moving objects, and you would shoot with the light gun. And it's not a video game, but it's like the prototype of what a video game became.
Yeah, it would be like these light-emitting diodes that went.
The panel ever needed more microphones.
Yeah. It was basically these light-emitting diodes that when light hits them, it creates electrical charge and an impulse, and then that sets off some gears or servos, and you have a spinning duck, like whee, or a whistle. Yeah, I know. But seriously, 30s. I think the 30s was the earliest example of such things. Yeah, and that's kind of amazing because you don't think about things like that. I mean, you see pinball games from the 50s, and that kind of blows my mind. But
It's about the 30s too.
yeah.
The Valley News.
Go video games.
All right, so I'm going to change the topic again myself, if that's all right. I want to ask my fellow panelists here if they can think back to the first video game that they actually felt ashamed to play or finish or keep playing or keep going back to. For me, it's pretty easy to remember what it was. Unfortunately, it was Chicken Little on the PS2. I finished Chicken Little, and the reason I even started playing this silly game was because it was my 1,000th PS2 game. So I had my picture taken with it at the store where I bought it. And I was like, really, this is 1,000? Can it be something else? I'm thinking, you know, can I buy like, you know, I don't know, something cool like Mark of Cree or something else? No, I already had all the cool stuff, so I had to buy Chicken Little. So I thought, you know what? It's special. I'm going to have to remember this. It's going to go down in history, my own personal history. So I played it. And I started playing it. And it was kind of fun, actually. And if people would come over, I would shut the system off and say, "Oh, something's wrong with my PS2." "Oh, what were you playing there?" Oh, no, nothing. I was just looking at one of those underground demo discs. Yeah, something came up. I don't know. Was that Chicken Little? No, it wasn't. It wasn't. I think there was a preview for the movie Chicken Little. I was not playing that game. So that's my shame game.
I'm too embarrassed to say.
You know, in the 80s, how games like Zork, like interactive fiction, were big, right? You know, there's a subgenre adult interactive fiction. Okay, game.
All right. I don't know if I ever played a game that I'm ashamed to play. That's such a harsh.
I know, it's very loaded.
I'm ashamed to play this.
Very loaded word, Sid.
I don't know. I'm gonna think about this some more.
Okay. You know you have one.
I have a lot more than one. I'm gonna go last actually because I think I can probably top last. Are you done trolling there in the second row, buddy?
Let's see here. I don't really have anything that I'm ashamed to play, but I guess embarrassed maybe if like one of my friends had come over and watched. I think, yeah, Little Mermaid on NES.
No joke, I played that 2 days.
No, it's a good game. You can beat it in 20 minutes. But no, yeah, I went to go rent the game, you know, because I went out every Friday night or whatever. We'd go and rent games or whatever. And, you know, of all the games, I picked out Little Mermaid. Like, I'll take that. And then, yeah. No friends came over that weekend, by the way.
I felt really bad. Difference is that it wasn't because of the game. When I bought Three Stooges as a kid, I was a huge Three Stooges fan, and not many kids were because it's a series from the 30s. I know I'm not old, Drew, but I got into it because my father used to tape them during New Year's marathon. He would tape them. So anyway, the game was announced like 10 months before, and I saved up my measly $2 a week allowance by mowing lawns and taking out the trash, making my bed. That was my allowance. So that's all the money I had. And the games back then were the same. People complain games are cost money now. No, they don't cost money. Because the games that are $60 today cost $60 back in 1989, and that was like $100 today, if not a little more. So imagine spending $100 on a game, The Three Stooges, and you realize I just blew my entire year's allowance. It's not even a bad game, but I was still disappointed. So I'm there at 9 o'clock at night coming back from Electronic Boutique from the mall, and just sitting there like, wow, I can't buy another game again for like 8 months. This is all I have. Unless my birthday or Christmas comes around, the allowance money, that's the only game I could ever get. So that was just not shame, it was sort of like, oh, come on, really? It's not like when I got Contra where you're like, oh my god, I'm blown away. It's Three Stooges, it's not a bad game, but, you know, okay. Okay, I'm gonna switch topics now. Oh, you want to go first?
I'll tell a story.
I'll let Jay finish this, but I'm not really ashamed, but I guess it's embarrassing. But I really enjoy. I think Joey enjoys it too. A game called Mega Man Soccer on Super Nintendo.
Nothing wrong with that.
How many people know this game exists? I can only imagine this. I can't confirm this, but I'm pretty sure Capcom said, "Oh, the World Cup is in the U.S. this year. We should put out Mega Man Soccer." And it's a weird game, but it's fun. I also enjoy Alfred Chicken. Alfred Chicken's fun. Okay, what?
Real quick, if we actually have games that we're ashamed that we enjoy, Back to the Future on the original Nintendo. I can still beat the game to this day within like 20 minutes.
Go you.
I've actually witnessed Joey do that, so it's not lying. All right, guilty pleasures. That's basically what you're saying. I like kids games, like Up on PS3 and Lion King and Aladdin, stuff like that. So, game I was ashamed to play. I'll tell y'all so you can laugh, and then I have a medical reason for playing the game. Hannah Montana the movie, PlayStation 3.
What?
I told y'all, hang on, it's true. Okay, the medical reason is, it's kind of long and drawn out, but basically I have OCD to a certain degree. Okay, like, when I met my ex-wife, she had a kid, so, ready-made family. My, at the time, daughter wanted to play Hannah Montana on PlayStation 3, and it was on my profile. Well, she played it for a little while, decided she didn't like it, didn't want to play it anymore, and every time I checked my trophies, it was incomplete, and it really just shit. So I had to finish it. So thanks for laughing at my disability, jerks.
Was it fun?
It wasn't that bad, but
What did you do in the game?
it was not the best of both worlds. I see what you did there, though. But no, I really do enjoy kids' games. That's a guilty pleasure of mine.
How about Britney Dance Beat?
I have the Spice World game on PlayStation.
Oh, yeah,
Spice World
Spice
game.
World.
You have to dance around.
Yeah.
PlayStation, never heard of that?
Is it like Bust a Group?
Yeah, I you heard of that?
How about this could be either something that surprised, what surprised or genuinely shocked you when it happens, a moment in time in video game history, whether it was a game that you were surprised was either really good or was built up to be good and failed, or something that maybe the industry went in a different direction that you were surprised at or happy about, or just your thoughts on that. I have nothing in my head right now, I just thought it'd be a good topic.
Can you guys like finish the systems at some point too? I don't
Oh, you want to finish the systems we have up here?
Yeah.
All right, well, Sid can probably talk more about this, but this is a Valley 4, and this is a Pong clone, correct, Sid?
Yes.
Maybe you can talk more about that real quick.
Because you took over our panel.
This is one of like a couple hundred different Pong clones that were available. It's called the Rally 4. And I just brought it because for those of you that haven't actually seen a Pong style machine, and a lot of people have seen just the regular Pong and Super Pong, so I thought I'd bring something maybe that you haven't seen. But it's kind of cool because it has VIN, if you want to take the controllers out. You can actually remove the controllers. This was actually an amazing feature in the 70s, that you could actually remove the controllers from the console, because a lot of the first ones, it was all built in to the machine. So that's that one, and then that's probably good there. And Jay, if you can hold that up. This is
Changed everything.
yeah. So this we've talked a lot about the NES, of course, and things changing here in North America in 1985. But in 1983, over in Japan, this little device was the very first iteration of what we know as the NES. And over in Japan, it's known as the Family Computer, or the Famicom. And interesting to note how short the cables are. It's like, here you go. You have to like be, the TV has to be 6 inches away from you while you're playing this thing. This is why you never knew the graphics were bad, because you were so close to the TV that you really couldn't see them, and you went blind after playing for about 6 minutes.
How come that system never made it to the States?
Well, it is a good question, and there's a lot of theories about that. But I mean, the system did make it, but a lot of times, I mean, part of the design of this system has to do with just Japanese design, how they feel about things and how they create things, and things are very small. Williams got an answer. But when it did come here, there were a number of issues and design issues. They wanted to look like something different, and that was one of the reasons. What were you going to say, David?
One of the reasons the cars are so short is because in Japan, they usually sit in the tatami room, which is these mats.
Everything's smaller, so.
They're futons, they lay them out, they go to sleep, so it's really very close quarters.
And honestly, like even the cartridges themselves were really small, smaller than what the ones that we got used to. So they made the cartridges bigger. As we know, even in the boxes, they literally are padding the boxes with styrofoam. Everything was made bigger because, you know, in general, Americans were, yeah, it's American, you know. We get your leftovers. But anyway,
There's a lot of empty space.
what there is a lot of empty space. But the other cool thing, that if you like this design, of course, and if you're a fan of Game Chasers, which of course you all should be, you can see what happens when you find the top loader and what a problem it causes between these guys. But the later iteration of the later iteration of the system in North America, at the very end of the cycle of the NES, there was a North American version. And part of the reason was it you that was talking about the Game Genie?
Yes, he did.
About the Game Genie, talking about the fact that the top loader wasn't compatible with the Game Genie, and you needed an adapter. That was one of the reasons. But they kind of, like typical Nintendo, they actually sort of recycled some of their ideas and made the top loader version look an awful lot like the Japanese version. So And it's cool. It's a very cool version.
Oh, sure.
If you take apart an American NES cartridge, you can see that there's a lot of empty space inside.
There is, yeah.
Especially in the earlier ones.
Yeah, and I also want to note the Famicom turned 30 years old this year. 13. So, happy birthday, Dave. In The Legend of Zelda, one of the enemies, you have to blow into the mic. Yeah. The Famicom was a very, the way it was designed, Hiroshi Yamauchi was in charge of Nintendo in Japan, and he was so strict on how this thing was designed. He said it has to have this, it has to have this, and engineers were like, working day and night on this. When the first batch of Famicoms came out, they sold about 1 million units. They're pretty successful, and then they discovered there was a defect in the board, and Hiroshi Yamauchi said, okay, we have to give everybody a brand new Famicom that bought one. I mean, that's how dedicated he was to seeing this thing be a success. When it came over to the US, it became the NES. Lance Barr designed the NES version you see today. He designed the top loader. And I don't know if you know about the advanced video system. That was the very first design of the NES that had had wireless controllers. It had a cassette player. Yeah, modem. It was wacky. It's in the Nintendo World Store if you want to see it.
I was going to say, actually the first Famicom had square buttons on it, which is really weird and uncomfortable, so they did away with that.
They really used the computer of the Famicom name because there was add-ons for it. They had a keyboard, and they had, of course, the famous one, the Famicom Disk System, which was, at the time, they used that to premiere Legend of Zelda and some of the other big games on there. The problem with the Famicom Disk System was that you could copy the games. There was no protection. And so after a year or so of figuring that out, they're like, this is not good for us because now we're losing a lot of money. So if you walk into any store, there's one in New Jersey, Digital Press, where they're from Japan and they have like hundreds of discs. I remember looking at them and probably 80% were pirated. And so that's why that nice expansion port on the bottom of the NES, it was there, but it was never used, because why would you ever use it? Because why would you give away games for free, basically?
I have a comment on that. Sorry, I've read a lot about this. Yamauchi had like a vision of, just think about this in like '83, having a vision of like what we know as the internet today, but he was like, I want people in their living room to play games on this, I want them to get the weather, I want them to get the news, and that's why he demanded this expansion port, which we never used, be on the bottom, because he's like, someday we will use this expansion port for add-ons. And also on the disc system, they had kiosks in Japan where if you wanted a new disc system game, you could take like Legend of Zelda and be like, oh, I want this other game now, and you put it in, it erases it, and puts the new game on it.
Nintendo was really good at planning for things that never came around. They actually were in somewhat deep talks with the Minnesota State Lottery, I believe, when the NES came out, to have a modem that hooked up, and then for a monthly fee, you could play the lottery at home for like 10 times a day or something like that. For a lot of obvious reasons that didn't get off the ground, but it's just interesting to think about the things that they actually were planning on trying out. Yes.
For the first Famicom, is it the same like the Super Famicom, how they have to ship it out at night because of the Yakuza? And how it was...
I don't know. Well, I don't know. I mean, when the Famicom came out, I mean, it was popular, but it wasn't expected to be a huge smash success, I don't believe. I mean, Nintendo was pretty successful with the Game & Watches by that point, but Super Nintendo was a huge, huge deal that obviously followed to the Famicom. But I'm actually curious, what in the hell is this?
Okay, does anybody here recognize this?
Telegames USA.
Paper shredder?
So I brought this with me just because, well, it was close by, but also it's kind of interesting. So it's one of those things, and actually I'm going to use this moment to do a little advertisement for tomorrow. We're all doing a panel tomorrow at 3 o'clock about video game collecting, so make sure you come to that. And as a collector, this is my lead in this. This is something that I came across that is probably one of the most unique consoles out there. There's a company called Telegames, which much like our classic game publishers person who's here in the room right now, took games that were at the end of the life of a console and started producing games for systems. Telegames did that with a lot of the Magic software for the ColecoVision and the Television. And basically what they did was when everybody else, when the main players left the table, this company came in and started making games. And by the way, Telegames is still around. Unfortunately, Nintendo Power is gone, but if you look through pretty much every issue, you know there was always an ad for that ocarina. I want to know who was making that ocarina every month in Nintendo Power. I really want to know what happened with that. He must have had some sweet advertising deal. And Telegames was the same way. They made games for the Nintendo products, but back in the day, they picked up rights for games that had kind of been at the end of their life cycle. This console is actually a ColecoVision clone. It plays all ColecoVision games, and it also plays Sega SG-1000 games, for all of you who have SG-1000 cartridges. And a little bit of history there. Everybody knows Sega for making game consoles, but Sega actually made computers in Europe. And we actually have one of their computers at the Personal Computer Museum. So if you want to come and check that out, you can see a bit of Sega's history. And so the SG-1000 was actually really a Sega Master System, but in a computer form, with a few differences. But basically that's what it is. So that's what this really, really strange console is. So it's called the Telegames USA Personal Arcade. If you ever find one, I didn't bring the controllers with me, but they're kind of cool looking too. If you ever find one, grab it. It's an extremely, extremely rare console.
Are they affiliated with Sears?
Not that I know of, no. Well, Sears carried, Telegames put out the Atari 2600 for Sears. Sears. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're thinking of those labeled games, yeah, no, it's
Sears,
different.
So
Yeah.
Sears wouldn't carry Atari brand, it would carry Telegames, and even the games said Telegames on it for Atari, at least in the US.
Controller ports, probably the same expansion port that the Famicom used. In fact, there was a whole bunch of them left over and unused. That's why I can put on here. No, I'm just kidding. He believed me for a minute. He actually believed me. He was like, really? Wow. No, it's, you know what? Almost every game console manufacturer does that. They'll put expansion ports on their systems, thinking one day. And basically, what it is from an electrical standpoint, what's a bit again? It's basically a bus that allows them to access every major feature of the console, and hoping that one day that they'll actually do something with it. So, yeah, I think that's probably the next thing. So we're at about 10 minutes left, or just under 10 minutes. So at this point, we're going to turn it over to you guys and ask if you have any questions about gaming history that we can answer, or any questions in particular for any one of us.
I haven't played the game, so I really don't know, but would you say the Atari ET game is really that bad? I really don't know anything about it.
I don't think it's that bad, myself. It's bad, but it's not that bad. I've seen worse.
Yeah, there's much worse. It's not that bad of a game. It's a little frustrating, but I don't think it's the worst game ever.
Who was the one that said it was like a good game? Would you
Now, Billy.
Guilty pleasure, maybe?
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you say it's a game you're ashamed?
No, not really.
In the back corner there.
For one of the questions, what would you honestly say would be your favorite gaming system of all time?
Favorite gaming system of all time? I would say Game Boy.
Super Nintendo.
Super Nintendo over here.
PlayStation 2.
NES, PlayStation 2.
Super Nintendo.
NES.
GameCom. Next question.
Guy with the glasses?
Yeah.
Have any of you played Gremlins at all?
Played what?
Gremlins.
Gremlins 2?
Gremlins.
On
It was the one where they had eggs that you had
on 2600?
like which console? I'm not sure if it was the Atari or what.
Commodore?
It was available on. It was pretty bad. As far as I remember, it was the one where you kind of had to drop eggs and before they turned into gremlins.
I've never played that one, but I actually have that on Commodore 64, but it's sealed in the box. I'm not opening it. It's sealed.
Okay, do you guys watch your own stuff? Like, do you sometimes just go on YouTube and
watch your old videos?
We can all.
I'm very narcissistic, so yes.
Absolutely.
It's painful. Okay, so I started when I was like 19, 20. I'm 26 now. So it's like a time machine. I watched as I aged. It's really disturbing and I can't watch it.
No.
Yeah.
One shirt.
Oh, just a question. Have you sold your rare? Yeah.
No, I have not. The question was, have I sold my NWC cards? No, I have not.
Would you?
Good note. You got the cash, buddy?
$2. 5 minutes left.
I think the yellow first.
What's your favorite Legend of Zelda game?
Link to the Past. I'm OG, Legend of Zelda, the original.
Ocarina.
I agree. Of all time.
Minish Cap.
What?
Faces of Evil.
Whoa. Kingdom Hearts in front.
Okay, what was one of the best NES to Game Boy ports you played? Because my opinion was a little behind.
Best NES to Game Boy port. I really like the Felix the Cat port. It was basically identical.
I just got that. It is
Yeah,
good.
it's very good.
Not exactly a port, but you could kind of consider it. I think Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters, is that the sequel on the Game Boy?
It's pronounced Cadigarus.
Shut up. Nerd. No, seriously, that is an amazing game. I think it's much better than the original.
Ooh. Hat.
Sorry to bring the whole topic of bad games up again, but I just
It's
have
okay.
to ask.
We forget
What is
you.
your favorite LJN game, if you have one?
Oh,
Yes.
mine would be A Nightmare on Elm Street. 4-player game, by the way.
From NES or
What's that? For me, it's Jaws.
Yeah, I think Jaws.
Jaws is a good game. It's soothing.
My parents still play that to this day.
Jaws?
Maximum Carnage on the Super Nintendo is a really good game. I like it a lot.
Agreed.
He's waterfront to me.
3 minutes.
Next question.
And more to bad games, can you tell us more about Action 52 and Cheetah Man?
What was the question now?
Action 52 and Cheetah Man.
History?
What about? Okay, so Florida, you had Vince Perry wanted to cash in on the craze, so he hired like a couple of college guys to program 52 games and put it out for $200 and try to create Cheetah Man as a Ninja Turtle sort of like entity that he could try to make comics and action figures of, and obviously it went horribly wrong because the games aren't even games, they're like tech demos that are incomplete, and you can't fit 52 Nintendo games on one cartridge. It's impossible. So they're like, each one's like 2 or 3 levels long, and if you get through them are that crazy, they just loop anyway. That's all.
There's actually a few games on the Action 52 cartridge that, if taken the time, would have been pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
So, and Cheetah Man 2 was never released in stores, so you can kind of technically say it doesn't exist, so it doesn't count as 100% NES completion. If you're one of those guys.
2 more questions real quick, and then we gotta go.
On the end here, yeah.
Pat was talking about when Nintendo was first being marketed in North America and it was like 12 guys just going out. I remember hearing something about making a marketing deal with Teddy Ruxpin. Can you elaborate on that a little more?
I don't think I brought that up.
No, you did, but I
You guys know more of that? I don't know much about that. Well, Teddy Ruxpin was Coleco though, wasn't it?
Actually, World of Wonders was the name of the company, and they were,
Okay.
There was actually, Nintendo had a lot of stuff they were messing around with in terms of distribution. World of Wonders was one of them, and also, if you look at some of the early Nintendo stuff, you'll see Mattel on everything as well. And of course, those are all deals that eventually fizzled out, but that's where the Teddy Ruxpin sort of connection is from, is World of Wonders.
And Atari turned it down.
Yeah, that's the other big thing too,
Atari
right?
said no.
Yeah, Atari, and instead Atari said no, and Atari was stuck with like the Lynx and stuff like that. So they obviously made in the hat. Last question.
What is the weirdest video game accessory you have ever laid your eyes on?
Well, I know what the weirdest one is.
Weirdest one.
There's the hands-free NES.
For disabled people, they have the hands-free NES controller that you control using your breath and your tongue. So that exists. It's really expensive. Only really strange NES collectors want that. I don't even want that because like, what am I going to do with that? I have something that only maybe 3 or 4 people have that I want to do a video of. But screw it, I'll let you know. It's the Super Seat controller for Nintendo, and so you sit down on it and you shake your hips left and right, up and down, and that controls your NES game. And they never really came out with them. Either they were just test units that are out there, or maybe Sid knows more about it, but no one has information on this thing.
The exercise bike. I've actually seen one of those, but I can't even tell you much about it. That's probably Norm's job, but the NES exercise bike?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
I don't
Oh
know
yeah, that's what he has to contribute
I
to.
don't know a lot about it yet. That's true.
Yeah, so basically they made this like stationary bike that I guess you plug into your TV, and I don't know what game you were supposed to play with it, but
There's a bike in it, and you on the screen you would like
In 8 bits, you would exercise bike, and you saw yourself on the exercise bike. But you had to buy like the setup for the pedals, and you bought the controller port, and you bought the game with it, and that goes for a lot of money too. This is almost going into the collecting panel.
Yeah.
Sneak
All right, we're
preview.
out of time, guys. Thanks so much for coming. Don't forget, tomorrow we will be here 3 to 5 o'clock talking about collecting video games. Thanks for coming. Have a great con.